The judge looked up from the adoption file, and Natalie's entire world tilted sideways, because she knew that face, those steel gray eyes that had once stared at her across a hospital waiting room and declared, in a voice stripped raw by grief, that she'd killed his son. Now Judge Richard Calloway held her daughter's future in his hands. The family court smelled like floor polish and anxiety, sharp and artificial under fluorescent lights that turned everyone's skin. Natalie pressed her palms flat against the wooden bench, feeling the grain dig into her lifeline, and tried to remember how to breathe. Beside her, Maya, 7 years old, gap-toothed, wearing the yellow dress Natalie had ironed 3 times that morning, swung her legs and hummed something off-key, oblivious. This was supposed to be the easy part. 18 months of home visits and background checks after therapy sessions and parenting classes, and a social worker named Carol who documented every bedtime story and balanced meal. Today was just a formality. The attorney had promised a quick hearing, a judge's signature, and Maya would legally become hers. No more foster care limbo, no more caseworkers with clipboards, just mother and daughter, official and permanent. But the man behind the bench wasn't just any judge. He was Richard Calloway, philanthropist, former corporate attorney, the man whose son had died in Natalie's passenger seat 3 years ago when a drunk driver ran a red light on a rainy Tuesday. The man who'd refused to attend the funeral reception because she'd been driving. The man who'd told her in a voice cold enough to frost glass that his family name died with Daniel and she had no right to wear the wedding ring anymore. She'd returned it by mail. He'd never responded. Now he adjusted his reading glasses and said, "Ms. Hartley, I see you're petitioning to finalize the adoption of Maya Rose Chen, currently age 7, placed with you 14 months ago through the county foster system." His voice was professionally neutral, but Natalie heard the pause before her last name, the married name she'd kept, the name that connected her to Daniel, to the Calloway legacy, to everything Richard had spent 3 years pretending didn't exist. Carol, the social worker, stood and delivered her testimony with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times. Stable income. Natalie worked as a paralegal at a small firm downtown. Steady hours, benefits. Clean home, 3-bedroom townhouse in a good school district. Maya's room decorated with hand-painted stars on the ceiling. Emotional support. Weekly sessions with a child psychologist who specialized in attachment, progress reports all positive. Academic performance. Maya had gone from barely speaking in class to reading 2 grades above level. Ms. Hartley has been exemplary, Carol concluded, setting down a folder thick with documentation. I've visited the home 16 times, both scheduled and surprise. The bond is genuine. Maya calls her Mama now. She's thriving. Richard made a note. His pen scratched across the page, a sound that sent ice down Natalie's spine. Remembered that pen, a Mont Blanc, black lacquer, the one Daniel had saved for months to buy him for his 60th birthday. Richard had carried it to business meetings, to charity galas, to the hospital the night Daniel died. And the biological parents? Terminated due to substance abuse and neglect. Father unknown, not listed on the birth certificate. No extended family came forward during the search period. Maya has been in the system since age 5. Richard looked up, and for half a second, Natalie saw something flicker across his face. Something that might have been pain, or recognition, or both. Then the courtroom door opened. A woman in a tailored navy suit walked in, heels clicking against linoleum, and handed Richard a sealed envelope. "Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption. This was filed this morning." Richard opened it. Didn't change, but his knuckles went white around the pen. "It appears," he said slowly, "that someone has filed an objection to this adoption." Natalie's heart stopped. Carol half rose from her chair. "On what grounds?" Richard's jaw tightened. He looked at Natalie, really looked at her, the way he hadn't since Daniel's funeral, and she saw 30 years of courtroom discipline fighting against something messier. Something personal. The objection claims that Ms. Hartley is psychologically unfit to parent, citing unresolved trauma from a vehicular fatality in which she was involved. It requests a psychiatric evaluation and a 6-month continuance. The world went silent, except for Maya's humming, still oblivious, still swinging her legs in that yellow dress. Richard set the envelope down with the careful precision of a man defusing a bomb. Ms. Hartley, I need to inform you that I have a potential conflict of interest in this case. The deceased referenced in this objection was my son, Daniel Calloway. You were his wife. The bailiff glanced between them. Carol's mouth fell open. Maya finally stopped humming. Your Honor, Natalie's attorney, a kind-eyed woman named Patricia who'd taken the case pro bono, stood quickly. We weren't informed of any prior relationship. Given the circumstances, I'd request you recuse yourself. Richard nodded. I'm prepared to do so. Docket is backlogged 3 months, and any delay would extend Maya's time in legal limbo. Ms. Hartley, you have the right to request a different judge. But I want you to know... He paused, and something in his expression cracked. I want you to know that I will be impartial. The law is clear. If the evidence supports this adoption, I will finalize it. But I need your consent to proceed. Natalie looked at Maya, who'd finally realized something was wrong and had gone very still, her small hand finding Natalie's. Who filed the objection? Natalie asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Richard glanced at the envelope. It's anonymous, filed through a legal proxy. But the information cited is specific. Someone who knows your history. Natalie's mind raced. The accident had been public record. Local news, police reports, her therapy appointments, her nightmares, the 6 months she'd spent barely functional. That was private. That was... I consent, she said. I want you to hear this case, Your Honor, because whoever filed that objection doesn't know what I've built. They don't know Maya. For a long moment, then nodded. Very well. This hearing will continue. Ms. Hartley, you'll need to address the allegations in the objection. He checked his watch. The same vintage Rolex Daniel used to wind every morning. We'll reconvene in 1 hour. Use that time wisely. He stood, and the bailiff called recess. The courthouse had a small conference room that smelled like burnt coffee and desperation. Patricia spread her files across the table while Natalie tried to keep Maya occupied with a coloring book. But Maya wasn't coloring. She was watching Natalie with those dark, serious eyes, the ones that had seen too much for 7 years old. Are they going to take me away? Maya asked quietly. Natalie knelt down, eye level. No, baby. I promise. We're going to fix this. You said promises are only real if you can keep them. It was one of Natalie's rules. One of the 1,000 small lessons she'd taught Maya about trust and truth and showing up. Don't make promises you can't keep. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Prove it with actions, not words. You're right, Natalie said. So here's what I can promise. I will fight for you with everything I have, and I have a lot. She pulled out her phone and opened a folder she'd been compiling since the day Maya moved in. Hundreds of photos, videos, screenshots, receipts. Every field trip permission slip she'd signed. Every doctor's appointment she'd scheduled. Every parent-teacher conference. Every birthday party. Every Saturday morning pancaked, geotagged, documented. Patricia leaned over. This is good. We can present this as evidence of consistent care. It's more than that, Natalie said. She scrolled to a video from 3 months ago, Maya's first piano recital, a shaky rendition of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star in a church basement. The timestamp showed 7:32 p.m. on a Wednesday. I left work early for this. My boss was furious. But look. She zoomed in on the corner of the frame where a bulletin board showed the church's weekly schedule, proof of date and location. Verifiable. Anyone can call the church and confirm I was there. Patricia's eyes widened. You've been creating an alibi for your entire relationship. I've been creating a record, Natalie corrected, because I knew someone might question whether I deserve her. So I made sure every moment could be proven. There was a knock on the door. Richard stood there out of his robe, just a man in a gray suit that had seen better days. He looked older than Natalie remembered, more lines around his eyes, more silver in his hair. May I come in? He asked. Patricia stood protective. Your Honor, I don't think... I'm not here as a judge, Richard interrupted. I'm here as someone who needs to say something before we go back in there. Natalie stood slowly, positioning herself between him and Maya. Richard's gaze dropped to the little girl. She has Daniel's smile, he said, so quietly it barely counted as sound. The way one corner lifts first. He used to do that when he was trying not to laugh at his own jokes. Maya's smile is her own, Natalie said firmly. I know. Richard swallowed hard. Natalie, 3 years ago, I said terrible things to you. Things a grieving father says when he can't accept that sometimes the world is just random and cruel. You were driving, yes, but you weren't drunk. You weren't texting. You weren't speeding. A man ran a red light going 70 in a 35 zone and Daniel died, and I needed someone to blame because blaming chance felt like admitting you had no control, Natalie finished. I know, I've been to therapy too. Richard nodded, and when he looked up his eyes were wet. That objection wasn't from me. I need you to know that. I don't know who filed it, but it wasn't me. Then who? I have a suspicion, Richard said carefully. Someone who might have access to sealed records, someone with a grudge. A suspicion isn't proof, Natalie almost said. But then Maya tugged on her sleeve. Is that my grandpa? Maya asked. The room went silent. Richard looked at Natalie, a question in his eyes. Permission? Natalie nodded, just barely. Richard crouched down, slow and careful, the way you approach a nervous animal. Hi, Maya. I'm Richard. I knew you're Natalie's husband. He would have loved you very much. I know, Maya said matter-of-factly. Mama showed me pictures. He had good hair. Richard laughed, a sound like something breaking open, and wiped his eyes. Yeah, he did. When they stood to leave, Richard glanced at the video still paused on Natalie's phone. Send me everything you have, photo. If someone's trying to claim you're unfit, we're going to prove them wrong with evidence they can't dispute. When they returned to the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted. Word had spread. Clerks whispered near the water cooler. A paralegal Natalie recognized from her firm stood in the back row, phone in hand. This wasn't just an adoption hearing anymore. This was a story. Widowed daughter-in-law versus estranged father-in-law. Dead son's ghost haunting the bench. A child's fate hanging in the balance. Richard took his seat and cleared his throat. Before we proceed with testimony, I want to address the objection formally. The filing claims Ms. Hartley suffers from unresolved PTSD stemming from the accident of March 14, 2022. It alleges nightmares, panic attacks, and emotional instability that would impair her ability to provide consistent care. He looked directly at Natalie. How do you respond? Natalie stood, her attorney beside her. Your Honor, I don't deny that I experienced trauma after my husband's death. I attended therapy twice weekly for 8 months, then weekly for another year. I was diagnosed with acute stress disorder, which resolved with treatment. I have a letter from my therapist, doctor, stating that as of 6 months ago, I no longer meet diagnostic criteria for PTSD and am psychologically fit to parent. She handed Patricia a folder, who passed it to the bailiff. Hudently, Natalie continued. I want to address the allegation that trauma makes someone unfit. Maya has her own trauma. She spent 2 years in a home where basic needs weren't met. She's had nightmares too. About being hungry, about being left alone, about people who promise to come back and don't. Her voice strengthened. I didn't hide my grief from her. I showed her that pain is survivable, that you can lose someone you love and still get up the next morning. I taught her that healing isn't about pretending nothing hurts. It's about building something new anyway. Richard set down the therapist's letter. Ms. Hartley, the objection also suggests you've been overly focused on documentation, that you've created an artificial record to present a false image of competence. A lawyer in the gallery, someone Natalie didn't recognize, expensive suit, shark's eyes, smiled slightly. Natalie felt something click into place. May I approach the bench, Your Honor? Richard nodded. She walked forward, pulled out her phone, and opened her photo library, but instead of scrolling through carefully curated moments, She went to a different folder, one labeled Real Life. "These," she said, turning the screen so Richard could see, "are the photos I didn't plan. Maya with chocolate ice cream in her hair because she insisted on feeding herself. The emergency room visit when she fell off her bike. Timestamp 2:17 a.m. July 9th. Discharge papers proving I was there all night. The tantrum in the grocery store when I said no to candy. And you can see other shoppers staring in the background." She scrolled faster. "Here's the parent-teacher conference where her teacher told me Maya bit another kid. Here's the note I wrote apologizing. Here's Maya's apology card with backward letters because she was still learning to write." She looked up at Richard, then at the lawyer in the gallery. "Whoever filed that objection thinks I've been performing motherhood, but you can't perform 2 a.m. emergency rooms. You can't fake a kid's tantrum in aisle 7. You can't schedule authenticity." She scrolled to one more photo. Maya asleep on the couch, crayon marks on her cheek, a half-finished drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands. "This is the photo I took last Tuesday after she fell asleep doing homework. No makeup, no perfect lighting. Just a kid who feels safe enough to fall asleep in the middle of the living room floor." He studied the screen for a long moment. Then he looked past Natalie to the lawyer in the back. "Counselor, do you represent the party who filed the objection?" The lawyer stood smoothly. "I'm here as an observer, Your Honor. My client wished to remain anonymous." "Anonymous objections in family court are permitted only under specific circumstances," Richard said, his voice hardening into something judicial and cold. "What statute are you invoking?" "I'd prefer not to." "I'm not asking your preference, I'm asking your legal basis." The lawyer's smile faltered. "My client has concerns about the child's welfare and wished to ensure thorough vetting before—" "Your client," Richard interrupted, "has access to sealed medical records and confidential therapy notes. That's not concern. That's breach of privacy, possibly criminal." He made a note. "I'm ordering you to disclose your client's identity within 24 hours or face contempt charges. Bailiff, please note that for the record." The lawyer sat down, jaw tight. As the session continued, Patricia leaned over and whispered to Natalie, "Who do you think it is? Who has access to your medical files?" Natalie's mind raced through possibilities. Former colleagues, Daniel's relatives, someone from the insurance company. But one name kept surfacing, bitter and sharp. Daniel's brother, Marcus. The golden child. The one who'd inherited the company, the trust fund, the Calloway name. The one who'd told her at the funeral that she didn't belong, that she'd married above her station, that she should disappear back to wherever she'd come from. The one who worked as general counsel for a hospital network and would absolutely have the connections to access sealed records. Called for a brief recess. 10 minutes, just enough time for everyone to breathe. Natalie walked Maya to the courthouse lobby, where vending machines hummed and fluorescent lights made everything look washed out and surreal. "I'm hungry," Maya announced, eyeing the snack machine. Natalie fed quarters into the slot and punched the code for animal crackers, Maya's favorite, the kind with the pink frosting. The bag dropped with a mechanical thunk. "Here, baby, but save some for after, okay? We might be here a while." Maya took the bag, then looked up with that too serious, "Richard, is he really my grandpa?" Natalie crouched down, eye level again. "Technically, yes. He was married to Daniel's father, but family isn't just about blood or paperwork. It's about who shows up. Who keeps showing up." "Did he show up before?" "No," Natalie admitted. "He was hurting. Sometimes people hurt so much they forget how to love the people still here." Maya considered this, crunching an elephant cracker. "But he's here now." "Yeah, he is." The elevator dinged, and Marcus Calloway stepped out. He looked exactly like Daniel. Same build, same sharp jawline, same dark hair. But where Daniel had been warm, Marcus was ice. Expensive suit, cufflinks that probably cost more than Natalie's car, and "Natalie," he said, not quite a greeting. "I heard there was some excitement in family court today." Natalie stood slowly, positioning herself between him and Maya. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" "I work 2 blocks away, thought I'd check in." His eyes flicked to Maya, dismissive. "This the kid?" "Her name is Maya." "Right. Maya. He said it like he was testing out a foreign word. Look, Natalie, I'm not here to cause problems. I just think you should reconsider this adoption. You're still young. You could meet someone new, start fresh. Why tie yourself down with someone else's baggage? Every word was a blade wrapped in silk. She's not baggage, Natalie said quietly, dangerously. She's my daughter. Legally, she's a foster placement. And after today's hearing, well, if the judge has concerns about your fitness, maybe it's a sign. Maybe you're not. Did you file that objection? Marcus's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Satisfaction, maybe. Or confirmation. I don't know what you're talking about. You have access to medical records. You have the money to hire a proxy attorney. And you've made it very clear you don't think I belong in the Calloway family. I think, Marcus said slowly, that my brother made some questionable choices at the end. And I think you've been coasting on his name for 3 years. Maybe it's time to move on. I did move on, Natalie said. I built a life. I found someone who needed me and I showed up. That's more than you've done. Marcus smiled. Cold, corporate. The smile of someone who'd won arguments in boardrooms across 3 continents. We'll see what the judge thinks. He turned toward the courtroom, and that's when Natalie noticed it. A folder under his arm, hospital logo visible on the tab. Her medical files. Marcus, she called after him. He paused. I know it was you. And when this is over, when Maya's adoption is finalized and you've lost, I'm filing a complaint with the state bar. Accessing confidential medical records without consent? That's not just unethical. It's criminal. Marcus looked back, and for the first time his smile slipped. You'd accuse me publicly? Drag the Calloway name through? The Calloway name, Natalie interrupted, survived your brother's death. It'll survive your misconduct being exposed. She took Maya's hand and walked past him, back toward the courtroom, heart hammering but head high. When they returned to their seats, Patricia was reviewing something on her laptop. Her face, Natalie, I just got an email from an unknown sender. Subject line says evidence. The email had no body text, just an attachment. A scanned invoice from a medical records company, dated 4 days ago, billing Marcus Calloway's law firm for expedited document retrieval. And a second attachment, a call log showing multiple calls between Marcus and the anonymous attorney who'd filed the objection. Someone was helping them. Someone with access to Marcus's records. Who sent this? Natalie whispered. Patricia checked the email address. Email protected. They both looked toward the bench where Richard was settling back into his chair, adjusting his reading glasses, his expression carefully neutral. But when he glanced up just for a second, he met Natalie's eyes, and she understood. He'd suspected his other son all along, and he'd just longer the new evidence, he said, his voice carefully professional, but Natalie saw the way his hand shook slightly as he gathered his papers. She found him in his chambers, door half open. He was standing at the window, looking out at the parking lot where ordinary people lived ordinary lives, unaware that inside this building futures were decided by signatures and testimony and the weight of words. You sent that email, Natalie said. Not a question. Richard didn't turn. I don't know what you mean. Justice.Calloway@temporarymail.org. You created a burner email to send me evidence against your own son. He was quiet for a long moment, then. Marcus called me last week. Said he was concerned about you taking on a child. Said you weren't stable, that you'd had a breakdown after Daniel died, that you were using this adoption to replace what you'd lost. Richard's voice cracked. I told him grief doesn't make someone unfit. I told him I'd grieved too, and I'd said things I regretted, and maybe it was time we all moved forward. He didn't listen. He never does. Marcus thinks family legacy means preserving the past, controlling who gets, and his face was haggard. But Daniel believed family meant making room for more love. He brought you home for Thanksgiving and you were terrified. I remember you knocked over a wine glass and apologized 6 times. And Daniel just laughed and said, Dad, she's perfect because she's real. He didn't want someone polished. He wanted someone genuine. Natalie's throat tightened. She remembered that Thanksgiving. The wine glass had been crystal, probably worth more than her rent. Daniel's mother had been kind about it, but Marcus had smirked, and Richard had said nothing. I didn't know what to do with that, Richard continued. With you. You were so different from what I expected Daniel to choose, but then I watched you at family dinners and you asked my mother-in-law about her garden. Not because you cared about roses, but because you saw she was lonely. You remembered everyone's names. The housekeeper, the driver, the caterer's assistant. You treated people like they mattered. He pulled something from his desk drawer, a small photo in a silver frame, Daniel and Natalie on their wedding day, laughing at something off camera. Daniel sent me this the week before he died. On the back. She makes me better. Don't screw this up, Dad, and Daniel's familiar scrawl. She makes me better. Don't screw this up, Dad. I screwed it up anyway, Richard said. I blamed you. I cut you off. I let my own pain turn me into someone Daniel wouldn't recognize. He set the frame down carefully. When I saw your name on the docket this morning, I almost recused myself immediately. But then I saw the adoption file, saw Maya's history, saw the social worker's reports, and I thought, maybe this is how I fix it. Maybe I can't undo the past, but I can make sure the future is just. Natalie picked up the photo frame, traced Daniel's face with her thumb. I loved him, she said quietly. I still do. But Maya isn't a replacement. She's her own person, and she deserves a family who shows up, not one who's still stuck 3 years ago. I know. Richard hesitated, then reached for he pulled out a file. Not official court documents, but personal records. After the accident, I hired a private investigator. I told myself it was to make proof that you'd been distracted, that you'd done something wrong, that I could justify hating you. He slid the file across the desk. The investigator found nothing. You were going the speed limit. Your phone records showed no calls or texts within an hour of the accident. Psychology came back clean. Not even cold medicine. The other driver was 3 times over the legal limit, had 2 prior DUIs, and ran the light at 70 miles per hour. Richard's voice dropped. You didn't kill my son. Chance did, and I spent 3 years punishing you for surviving. Natalie opened the file. Police reports, witness statements, dash cam footage from a nearby business, all time-stamped, all corroborated, all proving exactly what she'd said all along. She'd done nothing wrong. Why are you showing me this now? Because Marcus is going to argue that you're emotionally unstable, that your judgment is impaired, and I need you to know, need the court to know, that your response to trauma wasn't weakness. It was human. And humanity doesn't disqualify someone from love. They returned to the courtroom together, and the whispers grew louder. Judge and witness, father-in-law and daughter-in-law, walking side by side. Marcus watched from his seat in the gallery, jaw tight. Richard took the bench and cleared his throat. We're back on the record. Ms. Hartley, I'd like to address the psychological fitness concern directly. You've provided a letter from your therapist. Do you have any additional evidence of your mental and emotional stability? Patricia stood. Your Honor, we'd like to call Dr. who's joining us via video conference. A screen flickered to life and Dr., a woman in her 50s, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, office shelves lined with books on trauma and resilience. Dr. Chen, Richard said, you've been treating Ms. Hartley for how long? 2.5 years, initially twice weekly, now monthly check-ins. And in your professional opinion, does she suffer from unresolved PTSD that would impair her ability to parent? No, Your Honor. Natalie experienced acute stress disorder following her husband's death, which is a normal response to sudden traumatic loss. We worked through evidence-based treatments, cognitive processing therapy, EMDR. As of 6 months ago, she no longer meets diagnostic criteria for any trauma-related disorder. Marcus's attorney stood. But Dr. Chen, isn't it true that trauma can resurface? That triggers can cause regression? Trauma processing isn't about erasing the past, Dr. Chen replied calmly. About integration, Natalie doesn't pretend the accident didn't happen. She acknowledges it, grieves it, and continues to build a meaningful life. That's health, not pathology. Has she discussed Maya in your sessions? Extensively. When Maya first moved in, Natalie was terrified she'd mess it up. She called me at midnight once because Maya had a nightmare, and Natalie didn't know if. We talked through attachment theory, trauma-informed parenting, how to create safety without perfection. Dr. Chen smiled. She's not a perfect mother. She's a real one, and that's what Maya needs. Let me ask you directly. In your professional opinion, is Natalie Hartley fit to adopt Maya? Absolutely. She's one of the most committed parents I've worked with. She doesn't just love Maya, she shows up for her every single day, even when it's hard. Marcus's attorney sat down looking deflated. Then also like to enter into evidence a letter from Maya's school principal, her pediatrician, and 3 character witnesses, Natalie's employer, her neighbor, and a member of her church community. All of them attest to her consistency, her dedication, and her emotional stability. She handed Oli pages and pages of testimonials, all signed, all dated, all specific. The principal noted Maya's improved attendance and engagement, as checks, vaccinations up to date, no missed appointments. The employer confirmed Natalie had never missed work for anything except Maya's needs, school events, doctor visits, therapy sessions. The neighbor described watching them walk to the park every Saturday morning, rain or shine. The church member recalled Natalie volunteering in the children's ministry, patient even when kids were difficult. This is remarkable documentation, Richard said quietly. It's not documentation, Natalie interjected. It's my life. It's what showing up looks like. Richard looked at her and something in his expression shifted. Pride, maybe, or recognition that the woman his son had loved was still there, just stronger now, forged by grief into something resilient. One more thing, Your Honor, Patricia said. She pulled out a small notebook worn at the edges. Maya keeps a journal. With her permission, she wanted to share an entry from last month. Patricia opened to a marked page and read aloud. Today, Mama took me to the library and let me pick 6 books, even though the limit is 5. She said rules are important, but sometimes love is more. I asked if she would always be my mama, even if I was bad, and she said yes, forever, even if you're bad, even if you're good, even if you're medium. Forever. The courtroom went silent. Maya, sitting in the front row, nodded solemnly. I wrote that because I wanted to remember. Removed his glasses and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. When he looked up, his voice was rough. Thank you, Maya. The court appreciates your bravery. Marcus finally stood. The court. Richard's expression went carefully neutral. You're not a party to this case, Mr. Calloway. I'm family, and I have concerns about this adoption that go beyond psychological fitness. Proceed. Marcus buttoned his suit jacket, stepping into the aisle like he was approaching a boardroom presentation. Your Honor, my brother Daniel left a will. In it, he specified that any future children should be raised with awareness of the Calloway family values, philanthropy, education, legacy. He established a trust fund for his heirs, to be accessed at age 18 for college or business ventures. Natalie's stomach dropped. She'd forgotten about the trust. Daniel had set it up years ago, before they'd even discussed kids, back when having children was theoretical and distant. My concern, Marcus continued, is that Ms. Hartley is adopting Maya to gain access to that trust. Maya would legally become a Calloway heir entitled to— Stop right there, Richard interrupted, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. Are you accusing Ms. Hartley of financial fraud? I'm raising questions about motive. Maya comes from poverty. Suddenly she'd have access to significant wealth. It's not unreasonable to wonder. It's offensive, Natalie said, standing. No, Maya would be entitled to Daniel's trust. I assumed that was only for biological children. Marcus smiled. Exactly. So when did you find out? When did you realize adopting a child would give you access to family money? Patricia jumped up. Objection. This is baseless speculation. I'll allow it, Richard said grimly. Ms. Hartley, When did you learn about the trust provisions? About 30 seconds ago, when your son announced it in Marcus pulled out a document. This is a copy of Daniel's will, which was read publicly after his death. Ms. Hartley was present. She heard the trust provisions. Natalie's mind raced back to that horrible day. The lawyer's office, wood paneling and leather chairs, Marcus sitting across from her with that same cold smile. She'd been so numb, so lost in grief, that she barely heard anything except, "He left you the house, and the life insurance goes to you." I was there, but I wasn't listening. Her voice cracked. My husband had just died. I couldn't tell you a single word from that meeting except that I had to sign something and leave. Convenient, Marcus said. No, Richard said sharply. Honest. Mr. Calloway, I've sat on this bench for 8 years. I've heard thousands of witnesses, and I can tell the difference between calculated deception and raw grief. Your sister-in-law is telling the truth. With respect, Your Honor, you're biased. With respect, Richard shot back. You're trying to sabotage an adoption because you don't want to share family resources. That's not concern for Maya's welfare. That's greed dressed up as principle. Marcus's jaw tightened. I'm trying to protect my brother's legacy. By making sure a 7-year-old girl stays in foster care? Richard's voice dripped with contempt. I'm quite sure that's not what Daniel would have wanted. You don't know what Daniel wanted. He's dead. The courtroom gasped. Richard stood slowly, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Bailiff, I'm holding Mr. Calloway in contempt of court. Disrespecting the deceased in family court, making unsubstantiated accusations, and attempting to derail legitimate proceedings. You'll pay a fine of $5,000 and spend the night in county holding. Marcus went pale. You can't. I just did. Bailiff, escort him out. As Marcus was led away, sputtering protests, he turned back to Natalie. This isn't over. I'll appeal. I'll file a motion. You'll do nothing, Richard said, except consider whether your brother would be proud of the man you've become. The doors closed behind Marcus, and the courtroom buzzed with whispered shock. Mini Verada. Patricia leaned over to Natalie. That was satisfying, but he's right about one thing. He can appeal. He can drag this out for months. Natalie looked at Maya, who was watching with wide eyes, not fully understanding but sensing the danger. They needed to end this. Now. Before Marcus found another angle, another delay, another way to keep Maya in limbo. Richard called for a final recess before his ruling. 2 hours. Time to review all the evidence. Time for everyone to catch their breath. But when Natalie returned after a quick lunch with Maya, the atmosphere had changed. Patricia met her at the courtroom doors, face ashen. We have a problem. What happened? Marcus made bail, and he filed an emergence so severe he should have recused himself immediately. He's citing judicial ethics codes, arguing that Richard's personal history with you compromises his ability to be impartial. But Richard said he'd be impartial. I know. But Marcus found case law, 3 appellate decisions from other states where judges were removed from family cases involving relatives by marriage, even distant ones. He's arguing that Richard can't make a fair determination, because approving the adoption means acknowledging you as family, which he's refused to do for 3 years. It's compelling. Natalie sank into a chair. So what happens? The motion goes to the supervising judge. If it's granted, Richard has to step down. The case gets reassigned. The backlog, we're looking at 3 to 6 months before another hearing. Maya tugged on Natalie's sleeve. Does that mean I have to go back? No, baby. You'll stay with me. It means we have to wait longer. Maya finished, her voice small. For forever. Natalie pulled her close, breathing in the strawberry shampoo smell of her hair, feeling the fragile bones of her shoulder blades. 3 more months of uncertainty. 3 more months of Maya asking if this was real. 3 more months of Marcus finding new ways to interfere. The supervising judge, a stern woman named Judge Martinez, called an emergency session in her chambers. Richard, Patricia, Marcus's attorney, and Natalie, all crowded into a space meant for 3 people. Judge Martinez reviewed Marcus's motion with the efficiency of someone who'd read thousands of legal briefs. Judge Calloway, this is your case. Do you believe you can be impartial? Yes, Richard said without hesitation, despite your son being married to the petitioner. Despite my grief making me behave terribly toward the petitioner for 3 years, yes. I can follow the law. The law, Marcus's attorney interjected, requires not just actual impartiality, but the appearance of impartiality. How can the public trust that Judge Calloway isn't simply trying to make amends for past mistakes by granting an adoption that should be denied? Judge Martinez looked at Natalie. Ms. Hartley, you have the right to request a different judge. What do you want? Natalie thought about the easy answer. Say yes. Take the new judge. Avoid the appearance of bias. But the easy answer meant more months of waiting, more chances for Marcus to interfere, more instability for Maya. I want Judge Calloway, she said. Because he knows the context. He knows what's really happening here. A new judge would see paperwork and allegations. Judge Calloway sees the whole story. Marcus's attorney argued. He's too close. He can't be objective. Objectivity, Natalie said, voice rising, would mean looking at the facts. The social worker's reports, the therapist's letter, the school records, the pediatrician's notes, the character witnesses, the financial records showing I haven't touched Daniel's money in 3 years. Judge Calloway has reviewed all of that. What more objectivity do you want? Judge Martinez held up a hand. Appreciate the passion, Ms. Hartley, but this is a legal question, not an emotional one. She turned to Richard. Judge Calloway, walk me through your reasoning. Why should you remain on this case? Richard straightened. Because removing me now would reward Marcus Calloway's abuse of the legal system. He filed a baseless objection using confidential medical records obtained illegally. When that didn't work, he made unfounded accusations of financial fraud. Now he's using judicial ethics, a system designed to protect fairness, as a weapon to delay justice for a child who's already been in limbo too long. His voice hardened. I've spent my entire career upholding the law. I'm not going to let my son's death, or my own past mistakes, or my other son's manipulation prevent me from doing what's right. Judge Martinez studied him for a long moment. Then she looked at Marcus's attorney. Do you have evidence that Judge Calloway has shown actual bias in his ruling so far? The evidence is not what I asked. Has he made any ruling that clearly favors Ms. Hartley beyond what the evidence supports? The attorney hesitated. He held my client in contempt. For disrespecting the deceased in open court and making unsubstantiated accusations. That's not bias. That's enforcement of courtroom decorum. Judge Martinez closed the file. Motion denied. Judge Calloway remains on the case, but... She looked at Richard sternly. If there's any indication of favoritism in your final ruling, I'll overturn it on appeal myself. Understood? Understood, Richard said. As they filed out, Natalie felt a flicker of hope, until she overheard Marcus's attorney on his phone in the hallway. Plan B. Get me the background check on the social worker. If we can show she missed something, had a personal relationship with Hartley, anything, we can challenge the whole process. They weren't just fighting Marcus anymore. They were fighting a system that could be weaponized by anyone with enough money and spite. That night, Natalie couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Maya's soft breathing. The house was too quiet, too full of ghosts. Daniel's favorite mug still in the kitchen cabinet. The wedding photo she'd never had the heart to take down. The watch he'd been wearing when he died, cleaned and returned by the hospital in a plastic bag she'd never opened. She got up and went to her home office, pulled out the file cabinet where she kept everything important. Birth certificates, tax returns, mortgage papers, and at the very back, in a folder marked Daniel, all the things she'd saved. Ticket stubs from their first date, the napkin where he'd written his phone number, a love letter he'd mailed from a business trip even though email existed. And there, beneath it all, a sealed envelope she'd forgotten about. It was addressed to My Future Kids in Daniel's handwriting. Natalie's hands shook as she opened it. If you're reading this, it means which is bittersweet because I would have loved to meet you. But if you're here, it means your mother, Natalie, the strongest person I've ever known, chose to keep going. She chose to build a life even though grief tried to stop her. That makes you incredibly lucky. Here's what I want you to know. Family isn't about blood or money or legacy. It's about who makes room for you, who shows up when you're scared, who loves you through the hard parts, not just the easy ones. If Natalie is raising you, you have all of that. And if my father or my brother try to tell you that you're not a real Calloway unless you do X or Y or Z, ignore them. You're real because you're loved. End of story. Take care of your mom. She's tougher than she looks, but she needs people who see her. Really see her, not just what they expect her to be. Love. The dad you never met, but who believed in you anyway. The letter was dated. Daniel had written it after they'd started talking about kids, after he'd bought a book on parenting, after he'd started pointing out random children in parks and asking, "Think ours would be like that?" Natalie pressed the letter to her chest and cried. For the first time in months, real tears, the kind that hurt but heal. Then she photographed the letter, front and back, making sure the timestamp and Daniel's signature were clear. The next morning she handed it. "I want this entered as evidence." Patricia read it, eyes widening. "Natalie, this directly refutes Marcus's claim about family values and legacy. Daniel explicitly rejects that framework." "I know. But it's also deeply personal. Are you sure you want this read in open court?" Natalie thought about Maya, sitting in that courtroom, waiting to know if she got to stay. Yes, because Maya needs to know that even though she never met Daniel, he already made room for her. When court reconvened, Richard looked exhausted, like he'd aged 10 years overnight. But when Patricia introduced the letter as evidence, something shifted in his expression. "Your Honor, we'd like to read this aloud for the record." Richard nodded, not trusting his voice. Patricia read the entire letter slowly, letting each word land. By the time she finished, half the courtroom was crying. The court reporter's hands shook as she typed. Even the bailiff had to look away, removed his glasses, set them on the bench. "Ms. Hartley, how did you come to have this letter?" "Daniel wrote it before he died. I'd forgotten it existed until last night." "And you're willing to share it publicly, knowing it will become part of the permanent record?" "Yes, because Marcus keeps saying I don't understand Calloway values. But Daniel defined those values himself, and they look like love, not control." Marcus's attorney stood, scrambling. "Anything about Ms. Hartley's current fitness?" "It proves," Richard interrupted, "that my son trusted her, explicitly, with his theoretical future children. That's not nothing." Then Patricia said, "Your Honor, we have 2 additional pieces of evidence. First, a witness who can corroborate Ms. Hartley's character, someone who's observed her over the past 18 months. The courtroom doors opened, and Carol, the social worker, returned to the stand. But this time she brought something, a binder full of her personal notes. "Your Honor, these are my unofficial observations. Things I noticed that didn't make it into the formal reports. Times I showed up unannounced, and Maya was doing homework at the kitchen table while Natalie cooked dinner. The Halloween costume, Natalie stayed up all night sewing, because Maya wanted to be a butterfly. Teacher conferences where Natalie asked questions other parents didn't. How to help Maya with her stutter, what books would build her confidence, whether playground conflicts were normal or concerning." Carol's voice strengthened. "I've been a social worker for 22 years. I've seen people. Natalie Hartley is not one of them. She wanted Maya, not a child. Maya, this specific little girl with all her quirks and trauma and difficult questions." "How do you know?" Richard asked. "Because when I told her Maya had behavioral issues, biting, tantrums, refusing to sleep, Natalie didn't flinch. Most people would have reconsidered. Natalie asked for parenting resources and said, 'What else?' Like she was taking notes for a test she was determined to pass." Richard made a note, then looked up. "You mentioned 2 pieces of evidence, Miss Patricia." "Yes, Your Honor. The second is a validation from an authority figure, someone who can speak to both Maya's welfare and Ms. Hartley's capacity." Patricia gestured to the door. "We've called Dr. Michael Torres, Maya's pediatrician." A man in his 60s entered, wearing a white coat with a name tag, carrying a medical file. He was sworn. "How long have you been Maya's doctor?" "Since Miss Hartley brought her in 14 months ago for an initial wellness check." "And what was Maya's condition at that time?" "Underweight, undertreated ear infection, Delayed vaccinations, signs of neglect, nothing acute, but chronic inattention to basic health needs. And now? Now she's thriving. Healthy weight, all vaccinations current, no missed appointments. Ms. Hartley brings her in for regular checkups, follows through on recommendations, asks intelligent questions. He smiled. At Maya's last appointment, she told me she wants to be a doctor when she grows up, because her mama taught her that taking care of people matters. As in your professional opinion, has this adoption been in Maya's best interest? Unequivocally, I've watched Maya transform from a withdrawn, anxious child into a confident, healthy one. That's not luck. That's consistent, loving care. The hour felt like a year. Natalie and Maya waited in the hallway, Patricia pacing nervously, Carol sitting nearby with her. Other people cycled through. Lawyers with briefcases, families with worried faces, the machinery of the justice system grinding forward. Marcus appeared at the end of the hallway, no longer flanked by an attorney, just alone in his expensive suit, looking smaller somehow. He walked toward them slowly. "Natalie," he said. She stood, instinctively putting herself between him and Maya. "I'm not here to fight," he said, holding up his hands. "I'm here to—" He stopped, swallowed. "I'm here to apologize." Natalie blinked. "What?" "My father called me this morning. Told me I'd become exactly what Daniel hated, someone who values money over people, control over connection." Marcus looked down at his shoes, handmade Italian leather, probably worth more than Natalie made in a month. "He said if I didn't withdraw my objections and apologize to you publicly, he'd cut me out of his life entirely. No inheritance, no family events, nothing." "You're here because you were threatened," Natalie said flatly. "No." Marcus looked up and his eyes were red. "I'm here because he was right. I've been awful. To you, to Daniel's memory, to that little girl who just wants a family." He glanced at Maya, who watched him with solemn curiosity. "Daniel was a better man than me. I knew it when we were kids. He made people feel seen. And when he married you, I was jealous, because you looked at him like he was magic and no one had ever looked at me that way." Natalie softened just slightly. "Marcus, I blamed you for his death because it was easier than accepting that life is random and cruel, and sometimes there's no one to punish. And then when you filed for adoption, I saw it as you moving on, erasing Daniel, replacing him with—" He stopped, voice breaking. "But that letter, the one he wrote, he was so sure I can't keep fighting against what he wanted just because I'm angry he's gone." Patricia stepped forward. "Are you withdrawing your objection?" "Yes, completely. No appeals, no further delays. I'll sign whatever you need." Carol produced paperwork, an official withdrawal, already drafted, just needing Marcus's signature. He signed it there in the hallway, hands shaking slightly. "Will that little girl, will Maya, will she know about Daniel?" Marcus asked quietly. "Yes, I tell her stories. About how he made terrible jokes and cried at movies and couldn't cook to save his life but tried anyway. About how he believed family meant making room for more love, not less." Marcus nodded, blinking hard. Yeah, that sounds like him." He looked at Maya. "Your Uncle Daniel would have loved you, just so you know." Maya considered this seriously. "Was he funny?" "So funny. The worst dad jokes. You would have groaned constantly." Maya smiled, small but real. The bailiff appeared. "Judge Calloway is ready." They filed back into the courtroom, Natalie and Maya, Marcus trailing at the back. The gallery had filled with people, reporters who'd caught wind of the story, courthouse staff on their breaks, strangers invested in the outcome. Richard entered, robed and solemn. He sat, arranged his papers, and looked out at the assembled crowd. "This has been an unusual case," he began. "It involves personal history, family conflict, and questions about what makes someone worthy of parenthood. It's tested my ability to remain impartial, to separate the man I am, a grieving father, a flawed grandfather, From the judge I'm supposed to be. He looked directly at Natalie. 3 years ago I failed you. I let my pain become a weapon. I said things that were cruel and unjust. And when I saw your name on my docket, I thought perhaps this was an opportunity for redemption. He paused, but redemption isn't the point. Justice is. And justice in this case is clear. Richard picked up the stack of evidence. Daniel's letter, Carol's reports, Dr. Torres's medical file, the therapist's testimony, the character witnesses, the financial records showing Natalie had never touched the trust fund, the timeline of 18 months of consistent care. The evidence shows that Natalie Hartley is not just fit to parent. She's exceptional at it, and done it while navigating her own grief and the interference of those who should have supported her. He looked at Marcus, who had the decency to drop his gaze. The objection filed against this adoption was baseless, motivated by personal animus and greed. It wasted this court's time and caused unnecessary anguish to a child who deserves stability. Richard's voice hardened. He obtained medical records to the state bar for investigation. There will be consequences. Marcus nodded, accepting. As for the adoption itself, Richard turned to Maya, who sat very still in her yellow dress, hands folded in her lap. Maya Rose Chen, do you understand what adoption means? Maya nodded. It means forever. That's right. It means Natalie will legally be your mother. She'll make decisions about your school, your health, your life. You'll have her last name. You'll be connected permanently. Do you want that? Yes, Maya said firmly. She's already my mama. This just makes it official. Richard smiled, the first real smile Natalie had seen from him in 3 years. Then it's my honor to grant this petition. As of today, Maya Rose Chen becomes Maya Rose Hartley, adopted legally and permanently. Congratulations. He signed the order with a flourish, then banged his gavel. The courtroom erupted. Carol hugged Natalie, her fist. Dr. Torres applauded. Strangers in the gallery cheered. And Maya, sweet Maya, threw her arms around Natalie's neck and whispered, "Forever?" "Forever." Natalie. Richard stepped down from the bench and approached slowly. "May I?" He gestured toward Maya. Natalie nodded. He knelt down, same as he had that first day, and said, "Maya, I'm your grandfather now. Officially, and I know I wasn't around before, but I'd like to be around now, if that's okay with you and your mama." Maya looked at Natalie, who smiled through tears, and nodded. "Okay," Maya said, "but you have to come to my piano recitals. They're really boring." Richard laughed, that same broken open sound from before. "I promise. Every single one." 2 months later, on a Saturday morning bright with autumn sunlight, Natalie and Maya stood in front of City Hall for the official name change ceremony. It was optional. The adoption was already final. But Maya had wanted to do it, wanted the ritual of it, the public declaration. Richard was there, carrying a bouquet of flowers that Maya had specifically requested be not too fancy. Marcus was there too, standing at a respectful distance, hands in his pockets, still figuring out how to be an uncle. Carol brought cupcakes. Patricia brought sparkling cider. Dr. Torres sent a card that read, "To the doctor in training. Keep asking good questions." The clerk read the official document. "By order of this court, Maya Rose Chen is hereby renamed Maya Rose Hartley, with all rights and privileges thereof." Maya beamed, gap-toothed and glowing. "Do I get a new birth certificate?" "You do," the clerk said kindly, "with your mama's name listed as your mother." "Good, because she is." They took photos on the courthouse steps, Natalie and Maya, Richard with his arm around both of them, even Marcus managing a genuine smile. Watch, others just drawn to the obvious joy radiating from the little group. Afterward, they went to the same diner where Natalie used to meet Daniel for Sunday breakfast. The vinyl booths were patched with duct tape. The coffee tasted like burnt cardboard, but the pancakes were perfect, and the waitress remembered them. "Haven't seen you in a while, hun," she said to Natalie. "Who's this little one?" "My daughter," Natalie said. And it still felt like magic, that word. Daughter. Hers. Maya, this is Betty. She used to feed your Uncle Daniel so many pancakes we thought he'd turn into one. Maya giggled, then turned to Richard. Did you come here too? I did, Richard said. Daniel brought me here after his college graduation, said the pancakes were life-changing. He smiled at the memory. They ordered too much food and told too many stories. Daniel's terrible singing voice, his fear of spiders. The time he tried to cook Thanksgiving dinner and set off the smoke alarm 3 times. Maya listened, absorbing every detail, building a picture of the uncle she'd never meet but would always know through stories. Marcus, quiet for most of the meal, finally spoke up. I'm setting up a scholarship fund. In Daniel's name. For kids aging out of foster care who want to go to college. He looked at Natalie. I thought maybe, if you're willing, you could help me run it. Interview candidates. Approve applications. Make sure the money goes to kids who really need it. Natalie studied him for a long moment. He'd hurt her, badly, repeatedly. Forgiveness wasn't instant or easy or complete. But grace was possible. I'll think about it, she said. But if I say yes, we do it Daniel's way. No hoops to jump through, no proving worth for kids trying to build better lives. Deal, Marcus said quietly. Later, as they walked to the car, Maya tugged on Natalie's sleeve. Mama? Yeah, baby? I'm glad you didn't give up, even when it was hard. Natalie stopped, crouched down, eye level like always. You know what? I'm glad too, because you're worth every hard thing, every scary moment, every fight I had to have. She tucked a strand of hair behind Maya's ear. You made me brave, Maya said seriously. You just didn't know it yet. Richard, overhearing, smiled. She's wise, this one. Gets it from her mama, Natalie said, standing, taking Maya's hand. They walked toward the car together, a family built not by blood or paperwork but by choice, by showing up, by loving the pavement golden, and somewhere in the distance, church bells rang, marking another hour, another moral explicita. Family isn't about perfect people or clean histories or the right last name. It's about who shows up when you're falling apart, who fights for you when the world says you're not enough, who chooses you again and again, especially when it's hard. Love isn't proven by grand gestures or inherited names. It's proven by midnight doctor visits and boring recitals and pancakes on Saturday mornings. It's proven by staying. What would you do if someone tried to take away the family you'd built? How far would you go to protect the people you love, not by blood, but by choice?